Hi, Anna here. Welcome to the Expert Library. If you're walking or taking a drive or you're just taking a moment, it's really wonderful to have you here. Really appreciate it. This episode today it's a big one. It's interesting. We're with someone who's wildly intelligent, and that is a place that I know we all enjoy to be. So it's big because it could be uncomfortable. It's tender, powerful, and absolutely needed. I promise you're going to walk away seeing yourself and the people around you with much more clarity. If you're new here, welcome. We've landed here on an episode that really matters, because if you're listening to this one, it tells me something important about you. You're someone who cares about how you think, how you feel, and how to live in a way that impacts people in a positive way. And if someone sent you this episode, well, that's kind of cool as well, because it means that someone really cares for you. Today, we're talking about something that touches everyone at least once, in fragments, popping in and out. It's loneliness, not just the absence of people, but the deep sense of disconnection and what it does to our health, our performance, our choices, and the ability to feel whole. And I have the perfect guest to help us understand it. Associate Professor Michelle Lim is Australia's leading scientific expert on loneliness. Get ready to feel inferior, because her CV is mind-blowing. She's the CEO and scientific chair of Ending Loneliness Together, Australia's peak body focused on addressing loneliness and social isolation. She's also a principal research fellow and co-director of Social Health and Wellbeing Group at the Prevention Research Collaboration within the Sydney School of Public Health, University of Sydney. Michelle is also a practicing clinician, psychologist with over 20 years of experience. Her research focuses on loneliness across the lifespan, especially in groups impacted by chronic illness and mental health challenges. She's been the chief investigator on a major national reports, including the Australian Loneliness Report, the Young Australian Loneliness Survey, State of Nation, Social Connection, and the Why We Feel Lonely report, all of which are shaping how governments, non-for-profits, and the corporate world respond to this issue. In 2020, she co-founded the Global Initiative on Loneliness and Connection, a coalition across 23 countries. And just this year, she was appointed as one of 20 global experts on the technical advisory group to the World Health Organization, Commission on Social Connection. So that's one of 20 selected people to inform the WHO. She's impressive. With more than 250 national and international media appearances and a global readership of over 1 million, Michelle's work is not only scientifically rigorous, it's deeply human. So if you've ever felt alone in a crowded room, or if you're someone who supports others and sometimes wonders who supports you, or if you're just curious about how connection shapes our health and happiness, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Please welcome Associate Professor Michelle Lim. Hello, Michelle Lim.
Hi, Anna. Nice to be here today.
Oh, it's so fantastic to be with you. I have, as you know, all things health is wonderful, but I have a great obsession with people who are stupidly intelligent. And you are one of those people. Just going through your career then it's mind-blowing. I think I felt a little bit inferior, that's for sure.
No, I'm just doing what I think I know how to do best. I'm not very good at anything else other in life. So just so you know, so you feel better. I'm just cruising.
Just cruising along, doing one thing amazingly that everyone benefits from. And part of just a coincidence, really, of us chatting, we want to let everyone know that the Loneliness Awareness Week is coming up from the 4th to the 10th of August.
Mhm.
And the theme is moments matter.
Mhm.
And we really are going to try and create moments that matter today.
So
So
actually, I know if you think about it, how this podcast came about is actually through moments as well.
it
Because
is, yeah.
we
Should we
did bump
share?
into each other
Should
casually.
share.
That's
So
a classic example of a moment.
it is true. And we've reconnected in that way. Oh my gosh, that's so true. So wonderful Michelle was part of a clunky little boot camp that I ran 20 plus years ago,
Mhm.
and absolutely randomly ran into your amazing, embodied sunshine of a husband at a conference recently. And then we randomly ran into each other at the zoo. And
Yes.
now here we are. And the zoo thing's particularly random, right?
That
Because,
was very random. That
yeah,
was like because we were really at a specific part of the zoo at the same time and just went, oh, I think it was the lions.
it
So
was
it was the lions.
science. And
Yeah.
you only go for a short period of time. I'd come from an hour away. And
Mhm.
yeah, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. They are moments. Very
Those
nice.
are moments. The moments that do matter.
Yeah, absolutely. We made something of it. And
Yeah.
here we are.
Yeah.
Um, let's start with the real question. How does someone end up dedicating their life to the science of loneliness?
That's a really good question. Well, no, my training is I guess a clinical psychologist. So I've been in this field for I've been in active practice for over 21 years, training, 6 years prior to that. And I think that, you know, day in and day out when we do see people, uh, and they're not socially isolated, they're often with families, married, have children, or, around people all the time. There's a high prevalence of people really reporting loneliness as a challenge for them. And I do see that very much in my clinical practice and early in my career, seeing, very, very much, a population of our community that's incredibly disadvantaged. And we would see them 2 times a day, to help them because they are really that impaired. But again, the biggest challenge is that they are lonely, and our care industry is not really able to cater and to really cater for the social health of people who are really in the most vulnerable of our populations.
Mm. And I guess that's the thing that blew my mind when we reconnected. I was like, oh, loneliness as a symptom versus a thing of its own is
Mm.
really interesting.
That's right. And traditionally, I think if you were kind of speak to most mental health clinicians, they often equate loneliness as a symptom of poor mental health only.
Mm.
And we now know that that's not the case. And, hopefully your listeners will kind of learn something new today. But we still have that, I guess, that sentiment really still hanging around is that if we then deal with the mental ill health, then we would deal with the loneliness, when in fact that could not necessarily be the case either.
Yeah, we need to pause with that for a
Mm.
second. Like, I can't believe you just said that. It's that sense that they're not they're mutually exclusive.
Yes.
Yes. So
Yes. You
mental.
don't have to have mental ill health for you to feel lonely. And this is where perhaps what's happening here is that there's a lot of shame and stigma in loneliness because people think it's depression. People might, think there's something wrong with them. So we are trying to kind of rectify some of these misconceptions, which I think is very rife in this issue.
Mm, that's an amazing point. I'm so glad we started there, because I hope that allows people to crack open as they're listening and go, hang on a second. Oh, it can be its own thing and impacting me deeply, or someone I know deeply, without there
Mm.
being another big label that feels important in that
That's right.
way.
That's
Yeah. So maybe a controversial question. Is a little bit of loneliness ever a good thing? Can it
yes.
serve a healthy function?
Absolutely. So I think your listeners would need to understand that actually loneliness itself, if we kind of look from the evolutionary psychology perspective, it is actually there as a check for us. It's for us to do something different because we have kind of really evolved by thriving through communities and needing to rely on other people. Very similar to signals of feeling hungry or thirsty, we need to then do something so that we can survive. And loneliness is that signal for us within that social space where if you think about us needing other people and communities to thrive, even things like raising children, you need a community to really excel and thrive. Now, most people, though, when they think of loneliness now, they don't think of it as a normal signal. They think of something that's weird happening. So what we're really trying to rectify is to say, no, actually, you're normal. That's being human. You and I, we might not feel lonely right now, but we will in the future. So right now, maybe we're fine, but in the future, I might. And so, what is the issue is more that we're not rectifying it, and therefore we're persistently staying lonely. We're just staying lonely for a lot longer because we're not really getting the help we need, or we're not living in environments that help us get the help that we need.
So wait a minute, like is that the idea that we judge ourselves harshly by the idea of loneliness, and then almost that harsh self-judgment ends up us perpetuating more of the same behaviors?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're spot on. When I look at the rates of loneliness, and you can see this in our State of the Nation report, almost 1 in 3 Australians feel lonely at any given time. 1 in 6 experience severe levels of loneliness. To me, that high prevalence is normal. That's okay. Because this is we're taking cross-sectional data, we're slicing it. But in that particular study, I followed them up over a period of time, 3 months down the line. And what we found was that actually about 1 in 4 Australians were persistently lonely. So I asked them about their loneliness at one time point. I followed them up down the track, and they
Mm.
were still reporting that level of loneliness. So what to me that's saying is that yes, it's okay to feel lonely at that one time point, but we're living in an environment, or we might not have the resources or the skills to manage our loneliness so that we can actually feel more connected with other people around us. So that to me is more the problem, is that we're not really given the skills, the resources, the environments, the policies that help us manage our relationships in that way.
Really interesting. My mind's kind of popping off into two ways. Let me see if I can manage it. And so, if we were to say a day or two to feel lonely is reasonable, is there a measure like that?
Uh, Usually loneliness is measured in a 2 week period. So usually there are depending on the scale. But yes, what you're trying to allude there here is the term what we call what traditionally they just call it loneliness at any given time, or transient or episodic loneliness. It's loneliness where you might feel, oh, I need to do something, and then you are able to do it, and actually that rectifies. Whereas like persistent loneliness or prolonged loneliness, it can go anywhere from 3 months all the way down to years. So people are consistently and chronically lonely. So in some studies, we code it as 2 consecutive years, others 3 consecutive years. So it's that prolongedness that is the issue. Of course, in some of these studies, we don't know if people have become less lonely and then become lonely again. We don't know, but that's kind of a kind of crude measure
Mm.
where we see if they just keep meeting criteria year after we measure them.
Mm. Okay. Okay. So there's an element of, I feel a bit lonely, and then there's a trigger to come out of it, and I've got the skills and the environment to
Yeah.
do that,
Yes.
versus it stays and carries on, maybe in the absence of those.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And that's what we're trying to I guess mitigate and to reduce is that persistent prolonged loneliness. Because loneliness, as you say, it is a healthy signal. It is something for us. It's there for a reason. It's there in our DNA to reach out, to connect, to rely on others. But for some reason, we have this cultural expectations, societal expectation that, oh, this is something that we shouldn't talk about. This is shameful. This is or something wrong with you. Or maybe I'm not worthwhile as a person to be a friend to. I'm not, and I'm not going to tell people. In that follow-up report of why we feel lonely, where we looked at persistent lone, oh sorry, when we look at persistent loneliness, when we look back as to some of the reasons, oh, first off, sorry, I'll change that. But when we look at the State of the Nation report about why um looking at trying to understand how people connect, a lot of people are saying things like, if I feel lonely, I would try to actively conceal it. So they're literally saying, if I'm lonely, at least one in two Australians are saying, I will conceal it. I'm not going to talk to anybody about it. And they also feel ashamed. So there's something happening. Maybe, it might be what you pointed out. Maybe it's the conflation between what loneliness and depression is. People think that, oh, I'm lonely, so I must be depressed. Maybe that's part of it. Or maybe that you just don't know what to do with it if they're lonely, because there's not really any kind of help or resources for them. And going to mental health services, a lot of people who are lonely say, well, that's not quite me.
Mm,
That's just like, really heavy-handed, more heavy-handed kind of approach of more than I need. I don't need medication. And the number of people who do complain about loneliness, who do go to see a medical professional, often say, well, I get prescribed something or I get asked to do something so much more severe than what I was thinking that I might need. So, yeah.
wow. Okay. Because then I guess if someone ends up going down that line, it almost like, oh, hang on a second. Now they're saying I'm depressed. So it's
Mm.
almost like that agency of knowing what you're feeling is tricky as well.
That's right. And this is why it's so critical to really get our medical health professions really skilled up, really understand the differences. And right now, there's not really much of an understanding. And I would probably be able to speak more even to mental health clinicians, where we train mental health clinicians to identify what loneliness is versus not, and how to what to actually do about it. And many of them have no idea, even though they are in the profession, they've been doing this for years, kind of come away with new knowledge that, well, this is kind of stuff that I should know, but why do I not know it? I
Mm,
don't blame them because the research in this area probably would have accelerated in the last 20 years. So it's extremely hard to keep up, and it's often behind there's ivory towers. You cannot see that research. So that's why we're here, is really to translate what we do know, the latest evidence, to what actually we can do in practice and policy.
mm.
Mm.
From a personal kind of point of view, if someone's thinking about themselves, does loneliness creep up or is it like, boom, I'm lonely?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it depends on the trigger and the circumstances in which someone experiences that. Like a bereavement, for example, is like a classic example, right? But for someone who's like a carer or a parent, that's something that's a kind of slow burn trigger, that could creep up. Or, often, and you know this, you're so busy and you don't prioritize yourself. You don't prioritize your friends.
Mm.
You're really just trying to focus and try to do the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
These things that you think were not as important could actually be quite critical. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just gathering my thoughts here for a second because there's about five ideas coming in at once. So the new mother going back to work, we often get that trigger of, oh, I'm ready to go back to work,
Mm.
whether that's actually loneliness, getting ready to come back to this other environment in that way. And I also think of the people often working with leaders who that they are lonely, but almost working more becomes a
Mm.
solution to feeling lonely. Like,
Mm.
does it kind of the melee
Yeah.
come into burnout? Where, like, how does that all land?
You've touched on a really quite a new emerging area around workplaces and loneliness. Um, and it's a whole lot of statistics. I wouldn't confuse your listeners around, but what I can tell you though, and anecdotally, especially being a clinician for many, many years, is that people do use work as a coping mechanism. And
Mm.
this is not research, this is what I see in practice. It is quite a common thing. But also, they do yearn, like people who feel lonely, do yearn the connection. So they tell me things like, I work a 9 to 5 job, and the worst time of the week for me really is Friday when I leave the office and I close the door, open the door to my house, go in, and I shut it, and I don't say a word to anyone for until Monday. And that is quite a horrifying experience for many people, and it's that loneliness that does happen to your colleague that you don't know about. You know?
Mm. Yeah,
So
they would appear pumped to be back on a Monday. And at least
exactly.
they've
And these are socially skilled, amazing people who are, there's nothing wrong with them. You know, but it's something that they battle with. And often you do see a high prevalence in people who are single, for example, because it's this, I don't know, especially if their network is partnered up or the network has families, you
yes.
see a much more, I have these friends, but I can't ask them to hang out because they're busy with kids or they've got their other things going on. So when are they going to spend the time with me? So they feel left out. So they might have the community, but they don't have the community to bond at this stage because they're in different phases of their lives.
Mm.
It's not anyone's fault, but it is about that's what else happens when people go through life transitions and you're not in the same transition as your friend.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It data wise, and this is a bit about the wonderful week coming up, moments matter. Is there an age group, generation, gender that's dealing more with loneliness?
So we know, first of all, everyone experience loneliness at any given time, but we do see in big data, not just in our national data, but in international data, that young people are particularly vulnerable. Now, is this a generational issue? I don't know, because we would expect older adults to be lonely, but it could be that they're underreporting. So, because that generation, they don't give themselves the allowance to even say that. Oh, I'm so old and I'm wise. I'm the person that, people should go to for help, but I shouldn't be saying that I'm lonely. We do know that older adults are socially isolated though, so that's a different thing. But that's really important for us because it's what we call a bad partner in crime for loneliness. But young people, they're not socially isolated. They're embedded within schools, they're working, they're living in families. But trying to find that identity of who they are, making their mark in the adult world, those are real social challenges. Even navigating friendships, there's a lot of challenges there. Trying to see how they fit into groups and tribes in schools, or how they connect with the community. All those things are challenges. And so with Moments Matter, we are focusing very specifically on 16 to 25, which is a vulnerable age group. But this is also the first time that in the world that we're actually having what we call a co-design awareness campaign for loneliness. And this is the reason why we do that is because young people's loneliness is very different. And I don't want to be we don't want to be a bunch of 40 to 50-year-olds trying to design a campaign for young people. So we actually asked them to design it for us. So everything from the way we talk about it, to the colors, to the fonts, to the assets and videos, we have brought it back to young people in a research, capacity, and designed everything just to make sure that it's impactful, that young people, it resonates with young people, not just with the issues that they're experiencing, but empowering them, and not just them, in many ways also their ecosystem. So because they're not an isolated node in the network. They have family, friends, mentors, community, teachers, employers. All of us are supposed to help, young people. Loneliness is not just a you problem or this person's problem, it's a we problem. So every time we talk about loneliness, it's not just with the vulnerable group, but it's the people around that person as well.
That's a genuinely important point, isn't it? Because, like you said before, if the individual is burdening themselves with the judgment that there's something wrong with me, and there's no kind of, pull out from the people around them, then it kind of becomes this cycling kind of interaction of, yeah,
Yeah,
that's tricky.
it is because it's all based on relationships, right? So it takes two to
Yeah.
tango. So it's even I think as I mentioned earlier, it's like you might not feel lonely now, but it's really critical to start learning to have the language and the skills to help in a meaningful way, to be able to not feel make someone who reached out to you who said I'm lonely feel like there's something wrong with them or kind of make suggestions that you think would work, but actually it comes across as really callous because you don't understand their likes, their dislikes, the context in which they sit in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Let's talk about consequences.
Mm.
What actually happens mentally, emotionally,
Yeah.
biologically when loneliness sticks around?
Mm.
Does it impact us physically? What
So,
happens?
so remember when loneliness, when you feel like you do not have the relationships to meet your social needs, um, in by definition, loneliness is distressing. It's unwanted and it's distressing. Okay, so keep in mind, some people say, "Well, I'm alone, but I'm not." That's fine for me. Well, that's not loneliness, right? So loneliness is comes with distress, and when you're distressed, physiologically, you're more stressed out. So we can see that in brain scans. We can see that how it actually circulates more stress hormones through the systems. And when that happens and that's not rectified, then you have a consequence of poorer health, and, physical and mental. Now, most people do just say, oh, it's a mental health issue, but actually, most of the robust evidence is in things like cardiometabolic disease. So if your what the big data is showing is that if you're lonely at one time point, you're more likely to then report a higher incidence of cardiometabolic disease for that 4 years down the line. So this is your heart health, and what the mechanisms are things like health regulation behaviors. You're less incentivized to eat better, to exercise, to move more, to practice all those health behaviors that we do because we want to be here. We want to be, so it's almost like this idea that you don't feel like you're accountable to anyone, so you're less likely to take care of yourself. Of course, loneliness and poor things like depression, social anxiety, paranoia, that's quite well known. But there are other less well known things like immunity response.
Mm,
So loneliness, if you are more lonely, you're less likely to be able to fight out infections, higher cognitive decline, so higher acceleration to developing Alzheimer's disease. So things like that. If you feel like you don't have those connections, these poorer health outcomes do come in, and then you have what we call high mortality rate as well, because
mm,
you're more likely to die earlier. Very similar to rates of social isolation. Now, this is what we call neglected, when you neglect loneliness. So not just because you're lonely, don't be alarmed that
yeah,
this is
yeah.
happened to you, but it's more when you just, ignore it and you don't do anything about it, which is something that we're encouraging people to take action early.
It's such important points, though, because I think that's the type of thing that you've just said there, where I think it's hard for people. Like, and imagine people that can't be real. Like
Mm.
me just being lonely can't change my heart disease profile. That I'm more likely to become unwell. Like I can see how
Yeah.
the judgment stays, is that it's almost like now I'm judging myself, but now if I'm told that, I'm judging that can't be true. So like,
This is really interesting. In fact, one of my PhD students, when we look at that big data and we look how does loneliness linked to heart health. Like what is like what else is going on? And she actually did a really interesting study that was published in one of the Nature journals because it was so amazing. But she basically took physiological measurements. She measured a range of indicators to look at heart health. And what she found was even after you accounted for things that could potentially influence like depression, um, she could detect signs of vascular aging in a population as young as 22 years old.
Stop.
Yeah. So
No.
yeah, so even after you account for everything, you account for all the other potential things that could influence the result. She was still able to say, oh, young people, even as young as 22, showed signs of vascular aging. So we haven't caught them in the what we call the chronic, disease
Yeah.
after the onset of chronic disease, but we've caught them much earlier. So we think that progression is happening earlier.
Wow.
And so we often again equate loneliness as a mental health issue for young people, but actually maybe it's not just a mental health issue for young people, it's also physical health.
Yeah, that is,
So,
yeah, I'm like, even I'm like, wow, that can't be real. But it is real because you're here telling me it's hard to rest into the idea that just being a bit stressed
yes.
make me unwell. Like people find that hard enough.
And
But to
yeah.
say that lone, like I can see where it's so important to get the message out.
And, and this is why it's so difficult, I think, to do a loneliness awareness campaign because, unlike the other kinds of public health awareness campaign, like smoking or don't drink and drive, you show people an action that they shouldn't do, and then there's a consequence right away. It's like, yes, you die if you
Yeah.
drink and drive, right? So that's your typical public health campaign. But with loneliness, it's much harder
Mm.
because
See
the
how hard it is. I
consequences is down the line. So people don't tend to change their behaviors
Mhm.
because it's so far away. So you know what I mean? So
And
what
I
we
get caught up in judging myself. Like,
yeah, yeah. So
where?
I mean, at best, what we could do is change attitudes. We can change attitudes. Can we change behaviors? That is really the ultimate goal, right? Is to change behavior. So if you even just reflect about COVID, how we change our social behaviors, and then how we've changed back. Like the importance of social connection during COVID. All of us were like doing things like, I don't know, drawing on pavements outside, trying to connect with our
uh,
neighbors.
the
Where
Teddy.
is that now? Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So think about like, that long-term change. That's what we need.
Mm.
Whereas like people tend to respond only when it's immediate, when it's really
Faster.
important, and then they
Yeah.
forget everything, you know. So yeah, what we really need to do is create a culture of connection,
Mm.
and not just the person who's lonely or the people who's responding in our schools, in our workplaces, in government, in everything, in business,
Mm.
that we actually don't fundamentally we've always, you know, uh, prioritize something else,
Mm.
uh, and sacrifice that meaningful connection.
Mm. I'm interested in, I think we've got maybe two more questions and we'll let your beautiful mind go. I'm just interested now in this idea that some people are very highly skilled and
Mm,
there's nothing else going on.
mm,
And then I'm kind of thinking about the COVID young people that are now, they're now in their 20s where they missed that prime social period.
mm,
Is there a skill that bridges both of those ideas? Like when we talk about coming out of loneliness and the version of the person that goes, oh, time for me to come out, and they come out and they're done, versus those that struggle to come out. Is there a skill that people can go off and learn, or what's that?
Yeah, good question because I think this really ties back to knowledge,
Mhm.
and understanding loneliness is normal, but also being able to say I'm lonely and having it responded by the community in a way that doesn't shame that person or doesn't make it feel disrespectful. So I think we're back to trying to educate the community and the individual themselves. And we have to skill up. Like, my wish is that if I do say I'm lonely, it's just treated as, oh, would you like to connect? Let's go for coffee. And when I was working at university, I used to teach my team that, my research assistants would say those things to me. I'm lonely. I said, okay, let's do something. It was never seen as I'm lonely. I was like, oh, what's wrong with you? It was never seen as that, oh, is that something that I'm not giving you? Like, why are you lonely?
Yeah. What
You
do
know,
I have to do?
yeah, exactly. What do I have to do? Is this going to take out a lot of my time? Which is really what is, people often think. And it's trying, it's that conversation of so that people can feel like if they do say I'm lonely, it's responded to in a helpful way. And I think if we don't do that, then people are just going to keep it, not going to say anything, and maybe just let it persist for a very, very long time.
So we
Yeah.
kind of have two avenues. We have maybe the skill from the person feeling the loneliness to need the skill of not judging themselves harshly.
Yeah,
And then the skill from the receiver to be
that's right.
not judge them harshly, but also be okay with those social skills of how to respond.
How to respond. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. Oh, now I flip it a little bit. What's the smallest act? And you might have just said it, but maybe there's a beautiful story you can give us from your world experience. The smallest act that someone can say that you belong here.
Hmm. Oh, that's a that's a really that's a really good question. I don't think I've been posed that before, but it is a moment. I think learning someone's name is really important.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
that's my hardest skill.
is it?
Yeah. When I teach at uni, I make them like it's unusual to make them wear tags, but I'm so bad at it.
Yes, yes. Well, there is a condition where people can't recognize faces and names, but hopefully you
I've
don't
got
have
the
that.
faces, the
Yes,
name.
yes, yes, the name. Um, but yes, I think repeating their name
Yes,
back to them,
that's
I
skill
think
then,
is
isn't it?
really
You've learned
important. And if you don't know how to pronounce it, always ask.
Mhm.
And people who have very different names will be very happy. They're often very happy to give you the right pronunciation
Yeah.
and just keep trying. I think that to me says I see you. It's
Mm.
a small act, and I have a terrible working memory sometimes, and so I will repeatedly ask someone.
Yeah, I've got that
I
too.
know, I know, I will say I'll forget in a minute, okay? So I might ask again, but yeah, I think it shows that you're making an effort.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. And if we flip it one more time, if someone's listening right now that wants to reconnect with themselves or someone else, what's a
Mhm.
small thing that they can do
Yeah.
that, yeah, would
So
genuinely help?
Yeah, so small, very small acts. You don't have to do anything major. I think remember that people just want to know that you're thinking of them.
Mm,
Picking up the phone or I know these days people send text messages to just say, I'm thinking of you, let's reconnect and making the effort. And it doesn't have to be big. Sometimes it's a 5-minute phone call
yes.
to check in. And remember that, yes, there are relationships and friendships that are very low maintenance, but we still have to upkeep. We still have to do some social hygiene around that. Yeah.
Yeah, upkeep makes sense.
Yes.
And there was a study, right, that when we text, it has a particular response, but when we hear someone's voice, it's a much bigger positive impact.
Yes. Yes. And I think, technology can definitely be used for good, but I think in depending on your generation, I think there are some generations that would prefer a call. They
Yeah.
would prefer to schedule a call. And that to them feels more meaningful. And then there are, the younger generations who might be quite happy with just a text message,
Yeah. Yeah.
and feel that that's enough for them. So being able to know who you're connecting with and who you want to connect with and their preferences is quite important.
Mm, yeah. On technology, let's make this the last question.
Mm.
we've kind of got to ask it though, right? And particularly for me, because I'm using AI a little bit with my work, and I'm getting like a quite a generous bond with my AI. So it helps me write it something, or it edits something for me, and I speak to it nicely and it speaks back to me nicely. So I'm working by myself. It feels like a connection. It feels like a moment. What role is AI playing in this? It's an illusion or is problematic?
Um, I think we can't stop AI from coming in. It's already creeping in. People are developing products left, right, and center.
Mm.
And people are developing AI friends and companions. What I think really needs to do is obviously probably from the government point of view, regulation is really important. So I'll give an example. So I've heard of many people who've had AI companions, and those relationships go really well. Especially it helps them with their mental health, for a period of time, and helps them kind of do a more confident transition maybe to real life relationships.
Mm.
But then some software engineer decides to change settings in wherever they're based, and all of a sudden the AI responds differently.
Right.
Who's got the control? And do you know what I'm saying? It's like
Yeah.
you're actually, it's that level of who's got the responsibility to ensure that the AI companion is, behaving ethically, responsibly, not bullying the person, like all these things. So we don't know much about this space, but we know that we need to monitor it. And there's some benefits, but we, I don't, I don't advocate for the replacement of AI companions for real relationships because there are things that it can't do.
Yeah.
Um, and people do feel very attached to avatars and, characters that they play. And that's fine, but it's got to be in addition to that real life interactions and relationships. And I've got a lot of thoughts about this, and I will be trying to develop them over the next year. But I think um, that we have to be very careful about not losing our social hygiene or social skills. So breaking up with an AI and ghosting them is going to be very different from ghosting and breaking up with a real life person. So
Yeah.
I really hope that people understand that there's a huge difference and we don't practice what we are doing in AI with real life relation.
Mm.
Yeah,
Hello, my consequences, much different in those two scenarios. Wow, that's a really important point.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Michelle, what's one thing that we haven't chatted about that you want people to know?
Mm. I think the most important thing here is that loneliness is something that all of us will experience at some point, but we also all have a responsibility to do something. And even if it's just within yourself or with other people, consider what role you play to help yourself or help out someone else and try to use new knowledge to empower yourself and most people can definitely go to either lonelinessawarenessweek.com.au to look at resources or our main parent website which is endingloneliness.com.au. There are a lot of resources out there that we've developed to help people have that conversation. And it might even be something that people want to bring into their workplaces or their schools or their families to make sure that we keep up with those social hygiene practices and we actually don't just have relationships, but have those meaningful and healthy relationships.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much for your time and brilliance in this one particular thing. No, you don't have anything
Yes.
else. It's just,
Thanks, Anna.
yeah, it's been,
Lovely to be here.
yeah. Thank you so much. See you for Loneliness Week.
Yes, brilliant.
Bye.
Bye.